Hey everyone, we're going to give this a second try. Let me know in the chat if it's still really echoey. I've tried to fix the settings for the microphone. If this fails, I will switch to using my earbuds and my just Apple headphones. I think the Open Broadcast software is giving me some issues with my computer, as you might see on Twitter. Not only is it crapping out, but it's been giving me the pinwheel of death. But I think we're all good now. So sorry about that. I keep trying to get this working right. And, well, you all work with technology. You all know sometimes our best efforts still fail. So I'll get off of Twitter. No reason to be on there. But yay, I'm back. Sounds better. That's good. I think there is in my attempt to get monitoring working, because I want to hear myself just so I can set levels. I think there's some weird loop going on where it's feeding back into its own software rather than outputting to me at all. So I think I'll have to work on that in some spare time and get that solved, because I'd really love to know and make sure that I'm sounding beautiful for all you fine folks out there. But all right. So hey, thanks for joining me once again, and let's learn some more React, and just keep plugging along with this series. I'm really enjoying having the opportunity to teach something I really love, and to try and go about it in a way that, like, I don't know if it's actually helpful. I hope it is, but I like the idea of like atomically breaking down what's going on. I think another way to teach things is often to like give people, like, just build an app, right? Go through everything and build it really fast. Um, but you miss some things along the way. And I'm assuming most people coming to this stream have some familiarity with React and have used it a bit. And I'm hoping that like doing this not only like helps them feel solid in the knowledge that they have, but maybe shows them a thing or two they haven't. Or I'm also hoping that y'all can, if y'all ever have something that you see in my code that you think should be different and better, go ahead and send it to me in the chat, and I like responding to it. So I'm glad to see all the thumbs up. I'm glad that the microphone's working better. So let's dive in. Uh, just to kind of catch up on what was going on last week really quick. Last week we did a little bit of I'm sorry, I might cough from time to time. I'm still recovering, and I had a a chest cold this past week or so, and it's still working its way out of my system. So I apologize. I kind of have an itchy throat, but that's what the beer's for, right? I got myself a little session lager tonight. All right. Um, Last week we were working through some more state stuff. Specifically, we covered some functional set state, and I pointed you to some articles that would be worth checking out. And then we dove into making our first ref, because when we're working in React, we're working with what's called a virtual DOM. It's not the same as the actual DOM, and we all know that like sometimes we need to have access to the the actual DOM node itself. Anyone who's written any jQuery in their life knows all about actually accessing DOM nodes and manipulating them. And since React kind of works in this this virtual DOM environment for almost everything, right? Like we kind of needed an escape hatch to easily go get the actual node that we're referencing, and then we can do stuff with that node in the various lifecycle hooks. So we started exploring that. If you haven't been following along, I have been keeping a repo. Let me point you to that link. It this way, if you ever miss one and you want to like go back or at least just see what I was talking about, you can go to github.com/Kyle Shevlin/React 101, and you can find this repo. And what I'm trying to do with it is I'm not committing live. Maybe eventually I will commit while we're live, but I am committing afterwards and going through like the lesson and making a really good example. So like for example, like you could see here, I write all these comments for you so you can read them nice and easily and follow along. And then here's the component. And like if we look at this component with a ref, for example, excuse me, um, I say here, like I have a div, and this div, we're gonna set the ref to node ref on this component, and a little bit of style. And I said for this is for demonstration purposes. I'll never make a button this way, but what we do with this ref is up here in component did mount, we're going to add an event listener because we can call it in component did mount, and we'll get more into the lifecycle tonight, so we'll really understand this one. But we can call in component did mount because we know that the DOM node exists, and so I can actually get that DOM node and I can add event listeners to it. And what I said is on the click, I want you to fire my handle click method, and that's down here. And just like any good developer, if you add event listeners, make sure to remove them. So in component will unmount, we're going to remove those, clean up our dirty event listeners. I'm just kidding. But anyways, so this is like a really bad but working like poor man's button kind of thing, right? So if you look down here, I have it set so on the in the handle click, we're just going to update times. I'm sorry, not in the console. One version of this I was console logging out, I was clicking. In fact, we can do that right here. We'll see that I clicked, and we'll also set the state. And you can see this button has been clicked X amount of times, right? So, and you see how that works. Like we could do other things with this, and I think what the big reason to have the ref available to you is for things like I've used it with third-party libraries that need to hook into hook onto DOM elements themselves. Like for instance, GSAP, like animation plugin. How many of you are familiar with GreenSock? That I've used quite a bit by hooking onto actual DOM elements and firing during the lifecycle methods. Another good use case, I actually, for one website, I'm going to actually pull it up because I know it still uses, I mean, I wrote it, like they haven't updated it since I left the company, but Second Story, this right here is a universally rendered React app, and there was at a time where this was actually a full screen like slider. So you'd start to scroll and it would slide up one thing and it would shift a full, like it would do this, right? And it would do this. And it would lock in place. And in order to handle that, like I needed a ref that could tell me the size of the like a wrap, and then position the inner one through a translate by knowing how far to go. So that was an example of using a ref. Like I think a really good thing we could try and build. Maybe we'll have some time later, but we could try and build like maybe a photo slider or something like that. That's keeping track of like a position and how wide its container needs to be. In fact, that is one fun thing about React is you can actually define styles based on props. And we definitely need to get into that sometime. It'll kind of blow your mind a little bit, but it'll allow you to do things like setting fixed widths with inline styles in a very nice way. It won't feel quite as dirty as maybe writing inline styles back in the day might have felt. So, all right, but we covered refs, and what I really would love to cover this week more in depth is I would love to cover the lifecycle methods, and I would even like to build something this time, actually do some good coding, and try and build something like a really simple, like maybe a simple app or something that we could see why using the lifecycle methods is like kind of the heart of building up like an asynchronous and useful React UI. Okay, so I'm going to close this file, but I'm just going to keep it in there. No reason to get rid of it. But let's make a new component. I'm so sorry, folks. Thanks for bearing with me. I really appreciate it. Okay. So what shall we call this? We'll call it our lifecycles.jsx. And there it is. My computer took a little pause to finally put it in there. It made me nervous that I'd put it in the wrong folder. So we'll do our usual, you should know this boilerplate from now. We're going to import React because we're going to use JSX, and that needs to be in scope. And then we're also going to destructure component off of it. So we've got that. We're still using prop types in our app, and we might use some prop types, so I'm just going to prematurely pull that in. And let's set up our basic class component right now. So lifecycle extends component, and we're just going to do the render method now. So, and actually, we've been doing part of the lifecycle this whole time. The render is a part of the lifecycle of a React component. And when you hear people talk about lifecycle, what they're talking about is a series of component methods that will get fired in a certain order whenever certain events kick off. And the render method is the only necessary lifecycle method. Every component has to have a render method. If it, it'll just straight up like throw a warning at you if you don't. But also, like when we made our stateless functional components, essentially that's what we were doing. Those get wrapped in a inner React create class, and that function is basically passed as render, and that's how those work. I'm sure there's actually a little more nuance and optimization to that under the hood, but that's the idea, is that our stateless functional components are really just our render method with nothing else. And so we'll write a quick little render. And you know what I think I'm going to do? I think what I'm going to do is GitHub has some public APIs, so we can look up some endpoints, and maybe I can do something where I can manage to get like my list of repos, and we'll show it on the page, and some other stuff. So we'll use that as a way to build up a UI that has some asynchronicity, so that we learn how to handle kind of that state, but also how to use the lifecycle methods to actually fetch for data, and we'll learn through it that way. So I'm going to call this, we'll call it GitHub Profile. Yeah. And we'll just put some text in it for now. We'll get around to doing all that. And we need to make sure we export our component. Okay, so so I made a mistake and Prettier caught it for me. I forgot that you actually need to return your JSX in your render method. Once again, Prettier to the rescue. And this will actually throw an ESLint error for me right now, because it's going to tell me that, hey, you should write this as a stateless functional component. But we're not going to worry about that right now. And we're just going to switch this to lifecycle and the app component. And this should update. And it should just say GitHub Profile, I think. Oh, as usual, I've made an error somewhere. Cannot find module lifecycle. Okay. Did I... Life cycles. That would be why. So let's call it life cycles. Okay. Component should be written as pure function. Life cycles is defined but never used. No one used var. Oh. You know, I updated it everywhere but the place that it really mattered. You know, you know, debugging live code, right? Like, and we all do this, right? Like, we all make these simple mistakes. It happens. Okay, so we got our GitHub profile. I'm just going to use the GitHub REST API. See if we could find it. Oh, I actually searched GitHub itself. That's my bad. There we go. You can feel free to, like, if you're on your own computer and you got a little like create React app up or something, you can totally do this. I think what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to search for users, if I know this right. I'm going to make sure that I'm so sorry, folks. Yeah, let's just go to users. All right, get a single user. Let's do that. Okay, get user's username. So I think what's the starting point for all this? Trying to remember. Actually, I think this will show you right there. There you go. We could start with this. I'm just gonna type this in, users, and we'll just get my own. And this should give me a JSON response. Sweet. So what we're going to work with as we learn these life cycles is we're going to work with, we'll start with this JSON dump basically, and we'll work from there to eventually fetch some other stuff. So we can get, here we go, we can get a repos URL, right? So yeah, let's code this up. Let's code up a little GitHub profile. In fact, yeah. All right. Actually, what we can kind of do while we're doing this is we can also cover, we're going to get 2 for the price of 1. We can cover container components and presentational components. So specifically, container components are components in React that are concerned with fetching and massaging data. And they use the lifecycle methods to do that. And we'll build a container component, and we'll use that to gather up our data. We'll have it fetch to GitHub's API, get a response. We'll parse that response the way we want, and we will then pass that data as props down to a presentational component. And we'll build a presentational component. Presentational components in React are typically stateless functional components. They have no lifecycle methods, and they're pure functions. So whatever props we pass into them, they will render always the same. This makes them really testable. It makes it really easy because we could pass anything we want into our stateless functional component and get back the same result every single time. So it's very nice. It's deterministic, right? So we handle all the asynchronous code in one place, and we show we don't care about that in our presentational components. Just give us data, we'll spit it out, and we'll show you UI. So what I'm actually going to do is we're going to turn life cycles into our GitHub container component. And we'll just call it GitHub container for now. I will change the file name. And that'll mean I have to update it elsewhere as well. But this will all make sense in a second. Okay. I really should purchase Sublime, shouldn't I? Okay, and then for right now, we are going to return a hypothetical GitHub profile. It's going to get mad at us. But what we're going to do is we're going to pass this .state.data. This is kind of what we're going to want it to look like, right? We're eventually going to want to get some data, and we're going to pass it to our profile, and our profile is going to display it. So we need data set up in state. So we'll start with data is null. And we're going to learn our first little trick we can do here. I haven't shown you guys this, but one of my favorite things is the fact that React allows you to use ternaries to return different UI depending upon state. So what we're going to do is we'll get data off the state. We're destructuring it. And then what we'll say is data. If we have data, I want you to return the GitHub profile with data. Actually, I like to do it this way. And I'm sure Prettier will have an opinion because this is short. If we have data, I want you to show the GitHub profile with data. Otherwise, I want you to show a loading spinner component. So this is actually a pretty simple pattern that you'll often see in React apps, where based on state we'll render one thing or another. In this case, if I have the data, I want you to show me the data. Otherwise, I'm going to have you show me this loading spinner component. I haven't added either of these yet, so let's start with that. So we're just going to save this real quick. Yep, see, it threw it up on one line. That's perfectly fine. Trying to make sure y'all could still see it. Good, you can. I should use VS Code. I've given it a good try. Two things that VS Code does really one thing kind of bugs me is that its performance isn't quite as good. Like literally, if you open the activity monitor, things like Atom and VS Code, because they're built on Electron, are actually very memory consumptive. And for whatever reason, my personal machine especially, it only has 8 gigabytes of RAM. It's a slightly older 13-inch MacBook Pro, and it just kills it. Like, it uses 4 to 5 times as much memory as Sublime Text. And the other thing is, like, even with the Sublime key bindings and other things, I'm going to sound like such an old hat, but, like, I'm so used to how things work in this environment that I feel so slow. Maybe I'll give it another try someday. Everyone says it's really great for debugging Node, especially. And I would really love to have the built-in IntelliSense a little better. It'd be really nice if these things like auto-finished for me. But for right now, this is what I'm comfortable with. So that's why I stick with Sublime Text. I've tried it a bunch of times and tried other things, and every time you keep coming back to what's comfortable, right? And as long as I'm productive, that's really what matters. To the day I can't be productive or I'm so slow with Sublime Text that I need to switch, then I'll switch. Let's import our non-existent components right now. Oh, this will need to be, and we'll make those. I love rename symbol. I've got the same machine and RAM issue, but I feel like Slack and Chrome eat way more. Slack is a killer too, because it's built on Electron as well, and every like different Slack channel you have is a different process of Chrome. It's really the fact that Chrome is a killer. But what are you gonna do? Can't live without that. I love rename. K Rocket, can you explain rename symbol a little bit to me in the chat? I don't know that one personally. Or you can put up a link in the chat too, and I'd be happy to go look at it really quick. You're right. You need a lot of RAM. This computer's still treating me really nice, so I'm not ready to give it up. It's not really underperforming anyway for what I use it for. So this is basically the extreme of what I use it for: streaming live and I guess music production too. But for the most part, I love this machine. It's got all my great stickers on it. Hold on a sec. I will show you my great stickers. I love. Who doesn't love a laptop full of great stickers, right? So let's see. I'm going to try and do this without... I'm just going to move the camera, okay? I'm going to move the camera to see it. So we're moving down. There you go. Yeah. Okay, there we go. We got it all in view now. Almost all in view. All right, yeah. So I've got Reason Propellerhead on there. That's the music software I use. You know, we got the JavaScript, the Glamorous, the React Rally, the Redux Observables, Preact, Redux, Webpack, My Company, Egghead.io, Grunt. We got Shirley down there. Like, this is Shirley and Naughty's data sketches. The Soft Skills Engineering Podcast, Front End Happy Hour. You gotta love the State of Oregon and some Netflix, and of course the big React sticker right here. So yeah, you gotta love your laptop. Give it stickers. It's the fuel of your laptop. That's what extends battery life. I'm not shitting you. No, just Oh, that's really cool, Kat. That is pretty cool. That is really smart too. You know, I know VS Code's got a lot of smart stuff, so I'll keep trying. I'll keep trying. All right, so we've got these. Getting back at it. I hope y'all digged my stickers. Um, let's build these two quick little presentational components, and we won't give them much presentation at the moment, but it'll make some sense. So let's make the loading spinner really quick. It doesn't take any props. So as always, we need React, and we'll just make a stateless functional component. You should be really great at this by now. And we'll just say loading. Loading spinner. So there we go. That's all this is going to be. You can make it as fancy as you want. You could add a little GIF or something, or some SVG or something. I mean, oh, cool thing about React, if you didn't know, you can write SVG right in line. In fact, one of my blog posts on my blog is a bar chart that's just React and SVG. You don't even need a charting library. So maybe we'll cover SVG at some point to show you how nice it plays with React and that kind of thing. But we've got our loading spinner, and then let's make our GitHub presentational component. For the record, I actually generally break out my container components into their own directory. So those are called containers, and then components are all my class and stateless functional components. That's how I personally organize my React app. What's great about React is actually you get to define like your own organization. And I'm sure as long as it makes sense to you and your team, it's fine. What I actually love is the fact that you have to wire everything up. Like, you have to do this. Like, you have to import and export. And so, like, as long as it makes sense, you can follow that chain. It's perfectly cool. No one's going to yell at you, right? Like, unless it's just completely illogical. Like, don't go naming shit random. You want to be helpful to you 6 months down the line, helping you find stuff, right? You want to be helpful to the new person joining your team, finding stuff. So just use your head. You'll be good. Anyways, we're going to make this GitHub profile. Man, my throat, a little itchy. I'm going to have to keep drinking beer. It's cure for colds, right? Actually, my wife was telling me apparently whiskey and a hot toddy is a really good cure for the cold. Anyone ever had a hot toddy to cure a cold? If so, let me know in the chat. Maybe give me a good hot toddy recipe. That's right. I'm going to start crowdsourcing my alcoholic beverage recipes. I think that's totally worth doing on stream, right? All right. So once again, importing React from React. Now, this one we said is going to get some data, so we do need some prop types on this one. And for right now, we don't have anything to display. We'll just go back to putting this as the GitHub profile. But we will set up that prop type now. And it'll be an object, but I don't know what it'll be for right now. So we'll just say object. My linter will actually yell at me that object is not an allowed prop type. And really all that's trying to do, I'm so sorry, people. Really all that's trying to do is make sure you state the shape of the object you're expecting. If you just put object without, like with a different linter, it'll be fine. But it doesn't mean it's statically, it's type safe. That's the whole point of prop types, right? To give you type safety. And since it can't really see the internals of the object, you need to describe its shape. And by shape, I mean you could do shape, and what you would do is, like in this case, name would be prop types dot string. I'm sure that'll be there. In fact, we can let's go look at the response. It's called login. Okay, so login prop types dot string. We're gonna want some other things. Maybe this URL. I am using Airbnb's linter. It's very strict, and the reason it's strict is to help you build a really tight, robust application. So I do recommend it, especially if you're going to build something that's like prod ready. I mean, it's got like accessibility built into the linter and some other things, and so it's really important to I just find it to be, it works pretty well with Flow as well, if we ever get into doing type safety with Flow. I'm just starting to kind of use Flow. I'm no expert by any means, but you know, this is how we learn. We just gradually add things to our own side projects, right? Like this editor is Sublime Text. I am using the Oceanic Next theme, and I'm actually using a modified one that I did. And the only thing I really modified is I made object keys yellow, because object keys were green and they were the same color as strings, and it made we had some translation files at work that were impossible to read because the key and the string were the same color, and it was literally a whole mess. It was a sea of green, like algae on a stagnant pond. It was bad. All right. Anyways. I do enjoy getting a little ridiculous sometimes if you haven't figured it out. All right, let's pull in some other things. Oh, we do have a name property. So let's do that one too. We'll get name. We'll get the bio. They're all strings, so we're in good company. And I do want this one. I want the repo's URL specifically, because I want to grab my repos and make I'm going to make a list of them, and I'm going to show you how we map over things in React to build lists. It's really nice. It's that mix of JavaScript and kind of templating that JSX is, and so I do know I want that one. But yeah, this is kind of the shape of our prop type, and we'll say it's required, and we'll export our GitHub profile. And that should be good enough for now. You know what? Let's go a little deeper. Let's do it. Let's dive right in. So if you're ever curious about how I name things, how long have I been working? I've been working with React for a little over a year. I started with Brian Holt's. Well, did I start there? The most memorable start for me with React was Brian Holt's complete intro to React version 1 on front-end masters. He's now done version 2 and version 3. They're all on front-end masters. Let me do this. I will pull up that link for you guys. Complete intro to React. So this is the repo. Brian's a great guy. He currently works at LinkedIn. And he's a great teacher. He also does a really fantastic course called Four Semesters of CS in 6 Hours. That's really, really good. But yeah, complete intro to React. You could see the URL right here. I hope you could see that on the screen. Yeah, you could see that complete intro to React. He also has done, like I said, 4 semesters of computer science in 5 hours. So he's a good teacher, and this was really good, especially for people who are trying to break into slightly higher JavaScript positions. Studying this will help you in those JavaScript interviews where you're asked these algorithmic questions that you never actually use in your day job. So you heard it from me. That's part of my advice for you. Go check out 4 semesters of CS. Another great course. He has some code pens in here that you can like follow along and learn how to do. So that's how I learned React. Is kind of doing his course, and then I just stuck with it and started building stuff at work and that kind of thing. And now I use it every day. I love it. It's good stuff. Okay, let's actually let's build something out with this. So I'm gonna actually destructure all these. Yeah, I'm gonna destructure all the props off of data because we expect it, and we said it's required. And repose. And it's actually going to yell at me that it doesn't like underscores, it likes camel case. And so if you didn't know, you can actually rename keys, your variables, when you destructure. So, and you just do that by basically doing a key and a value. That's how that looks. So, and then we'll move the return up here, and we'll move this up, and let's start. I'm gonna follow excuse me, I'm gonna follow a BEM strategy. My naming convention is a shortened version that me and my team built. We call it BUM because we're lazy, and you'll see that it's shorter and you can be a little lazier, but I called it like a BEM with an underscore modification. What we learned is that traditional BEM, if you guys know your CSS well, looks like this. You'll have a block, and then elements are like this. And if you ever have a modifier, you do this. And what's kind of annoying about this is not only these doubles, but so this treats it as one thing. Your editor, when you double click or you command D a word, will treat underscores as one word, but it'll treat dashes as 2 separate words. So if you have a long name, block long name, in BEM, this is really hard to select really quickly, right? Because it breaks at every dash. So the modification we did, so that's a traditional one. I'll show you what BUM looks like. BUM with a long name is underscores because it'll treat it as one thing. Okay? Any element is a dash to break it. So our block is one thing. Our elements with long name, like we could do with long name, and that's its own element. And then our modifiers stay the same. There really was no great way to distinguish between that. But it's a slightly terser way that I've just used so much over the last 2 to 3 years that I just do it. In fact, at work it's really hard because we use regular BEM, and it's really challenging. But I do love the fact that I can very quickly like grab pieces of my class name without getting confused, or not confused, but without having to do like any weird thing. I mean, look how nice that is. And then I move over, I command D, select it. It's just really easy to copy paste around your application like this. So what we're going to do is we'll make our GitHub profile name, and we'll put the name in here. And we'll just, I'm just going to be real lazy right now. And we'll do login. We'll do bio. The URL could be, let's actually do that here. We'll put a link, ahref equals the URL. And we'll make the text the name. No, they didn't think about that, did they, Scott? Sorry. But, they were just spitballing when they made it, and they made something that really caught on. In fact, I kind of teach, I teach I've never like written this down, and I've never like made a video of it. Maybe I will someday, but I like to teach about how BEM is more than a syntax, it's a strategy. And I think that's where our BEM really shines. But we'll learn once we get deeper into this and start using CSS and JS that like these strategies for doing disciplined style encapsulation aren't really necessary in React when we can do style sheets basically on the fly that will be scoped to our elements, to our components, and we don't have to worry anymore about collisions and that kind of thing. It's kind of really nice. I definitely miss it when I don't have it available to me. But I do love Sass. I've written a lot of Sass. Some of you might have seen my library I posted yesterday, Chevy.js. Well, it's actually a JavaScript rebuild of my Sass library, Chevy, which does vertical rhythm and typography in Sass. So I've written more styles than I cared to. I'm not choking up. I'm just apparently can't breathe tonight. Okay. And then, we're not actually going to get this repos URL. We're going to get repos now that I realize it. By the time it gets to here, I want it to be repos. And it should be an array of, I think it's going to be a prop types string. I think we'll get the repo name. So I taught you all this, and then I don't need it. But what we'll do is we'll show you really quickly how making a list of items in React is really easy and really great. So we learned in the past, and you see it up here. You see we're using JSX expressions, right? This is JavaScript. Inside of these curly braces, it's just JavaScript. This is the variable that we have up here, right? This isn't a binding. It's not like templating where I've made a property on an object and it got magically bound in some template to another thing. This is literally a variable that's getting just put here. It'll get evaluated and put in the DOM. So our URL will get passed in and we'll get our name, right? And then here for repos, we're going to get an array, and what we're going to do is we're going to operate on that array. So what I'll say is repos we'll do another ternary. If we have repos length, we'll want to show the list of the repos. And if we don't have repos, we'll want to show something else. We'll show an empty no repos can be found or something like that. In fact, we'll just do that now. Okay. Those of you who aren't really familiar with JavaScript, it might not be obvious to you that that repos.length is a good enough Boolean for us. So in JavaScript, we have this concept of things being truthy and being falsy. So there are values that will eventually evaluate to a true value. There are values that will eventually evaluate to a false value. And 0 happens to be one of those values that will evaluate to false. So when we don't have any repos and our length of the repos is 0, that's a false value, right? And in a ternary, that'll go to the second thing, and in this case, we will return no repos were found. In the first one, what we're going to do is we will return our list, essentially. In fact, those of you who are sticklers for using the correct semantic HTML, let me switch that for you first. We should be good devs, and we should use the right HTML element that's called for the job. Okay, so inside of this part, we know we have repos. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our repos, and I might have to experiment with this. My brain is kind of having a lapse on whether these need to be also inside of a JS expression or not. I think they do in this case, but I could be wrong. We'll find out. Actually, the way that's highlighting kind of makes me think they don't, but we'll do this. Not list. That's silly. We're going to map over them. So those of you who are a little unfamiliar with using some of the array methods in JavaScript, AMAXCF, give me 1 second to finish this thought, and I will definitely talk to you about that. For those of you who aren't like JavaScript focused, like it's not your first your language or the thing you are most passionate about, we can use array methods inside JavaScript expressions, right? Like inside of these curly brackets, which means like when we have an array like repos will be an array of like strings after I massage it. There are certain methods we can use to manipulate those arrays. Things like mapping, which we'll see. We can use filter. We can use reduce. You could use a for each, and sorting and other things. And so what I want to show is like this is a very typical way of taking an array and then generating JSX out of it. So in this case, if you understand if you understand map, it takes a callback function whose first argument is the item at that point in the array, and that in this case is a repo, and we will make a list item element. We're going to return it. Every time we have an array, we need to make sure we return each item needs to have a unique key, right? This is one of the most common hiccups in all of React is forgetting to add a key. Now, granted, it'll give you a warning, but what will happen if you don't have a key is that when it goes to update, it won't know precisely which ones to update. The key helps it identify which items need to change and then only change those ones. Ryan Florence had a really great tweet about a week ago, maybe a little less, showing it with a list, like an array of inputs, and showing how the wrong input was getting the wrong values. It was a really good example of it. In this case, we were going to just, not Kyle, that's silly, key. We can just use the repo again, because I'm going to get an array of strings, and each repo on GitHub needs to have a unique name anyways, so we can trust that that name is unique, so we can just pass the repo, and then we'll pass the repo again because we want to actually display the name. Maybe I'll make these objects as we get further so that you can see the repo name, and maybe it's a linked like an anchor tag. But for right now, I think this is fine. And that's really all there is to it. We have an array. We're going to map through each item of the array, in this case a repo, and we're going to return whatever JSX we want. In this case, we just need to return a list item and with a key of repo and display the text repo inside. And so, I do not like that. Okay, sometimes Prettier doesn't do things in a way I really appreciate. I bet you it's because, like, if I shrink it down, It has to do with line length. Let me see if I could change my settings. Oh, that's awful. We need to go shorter while we're streaming. We need a short print width. So much better. All right, let me bump that back up so y'all could see. All right. In this case, the key is just fine. The repo is it doesn't matter what the key is so long as it's unique. The repo name will be unique every time. In this case, I will get an array of unique strings. Never use index for your key. That's an anti-pattern because index is based on the order of the array itself, not on each item, right? So if you ever change the item, the order or sort it or anything, all your keys will be wrong. As far as what you would probably normally use as a key, generally you'll probably get an object with a lot more data than what I'm going to actually present you with. So you might use something like an ID or a UUID, a unique identifier, right? Like it's really the only important thing is that the key itself is unique per item. It doesn't actually matter anything else per that. And as long as that key will always stay with the item, right? Like, so if we sort it, will that key still be with the same item? That's important. So I want to quickly address before I move on AMAC F or that's what I'm gonna call you AMAC F. He asked, is React a good way to build a poorly designed, unresponsive website with a bloated mess of unnecessary JavaScript? First off, React is actually it's a pretty small library. So as far as bloat, you could do so much worse than JavaScript. In fact, just throw jQuery in your application. It's much bigger. So I feel like that's a somewhat like biased response to start with. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to point out like the way you worded the question kind of says like you can make this mess with any JavaScript. But React is JavaScript, and there's plenty of times where React is more than you need. I think as engineers and developers, it's really our job to learn our trade well enough to recognize situations where the right thing is less or to do something else. React is not the right tool for every job. Sure, it is a mighty fine hammer. It is a hammer that I love wielding and pounding nails with, but not every problem is a nail. And I really would push everyone to use the right tool for the job. That being said, if it's poorly designed, if it's unresponsive, React isn't going to help you with that. In fact, no framework is going to magically change that. What is going to change a poorly designed, unresponsive website or application is going to be conversations. Like you need to have conversations with whoever it is that is building it, who has things at stake, the stakeholders, and explain to them why, and win them over, right? You actually have to sell them on the idea that we can do better, that doing better is better for us. It'll maybe get us more money. It'll improve developer experience. It'll improve user experience. You need to take whatever time and whatever it takes to coach people and sell them on ideas of doing things in a better way, right? As you gain knowledge and skill, part of what you need to gain knowledge and skill in is those soft skills to be able to like kind of win people over. Now, I'm saying this as someone who's really kind of bad at it. I'm not great at it. I'm mostly a very logical, common sense kind of person. And when people don't understand what I'm saying, it really gets to me and I struggle with it. And I don't know what to do next. I'm not a political person in that sense. I'm not someone who's really... I'm not naturally empathetic, so I'm not really great at like understanding so-and-so's motivations and this kind of thing. I would be the worst like con artist ever. I'm too honest and I don't have the kind of magical foresight to do it. Like, but My point being, like, certain problems really aren't code problems. And based on your question, like half that question at least is not a code problem. It's a like a product conversation problem. So I hope that helps. I hope you can kind of recognize those differences there. That no technology saves uh, a piece of shit idea. Like ideas need refinement, just like code needs. They need refactoring, just like code needs refactoring. So best of luck refactoring that idea, because I think a good refactor for a good idea sometimes leads to a really great product, right? So Fun Function is a great show. I love it. Matthias is funny as could be. Maybe I should get the papers and start throwing them behind me, right? I couldn't do that. I couldn't copy him. He's so good. Maybe one day I will be fortunate enough to go to Sweden and meet him. I don't know. All right. So we've kind of built out our component here. This is the shape of our basic GitHub profile. We haven't done any data fetching yet, but we can probably go to our app and see if it works. Okay. A state is not defined. Oh, this dot state. You're welcome, AMACF. All right, so we don't have any data right now, so we're showing our loading spinner. You know what? I am going to add the quickest of CSS to this, just to give us some padding around the application. There we go. That's a little nicer. All right. So our GitHub profile doesn't have any data. It's showing our loading component. So we go back to our container, and we don't have any data. So we're going to show the loading spinner. What I'm going to do briefly is just for cheating, and part of like I want you to understand that. Stateless functional components really don't care how they get their data. Let's just quickly like make a data object here, and we can give it whatever we want so long as it matches our keys. We'll call it name is Kyle, login Kyle Shevlin, URL foo. I don't actually care. Bio more than you asked for. I actually think it might be funny at some point to make like a t-shirt or a hat that says like Mount Yaff, and you and I and everyone would know that it's an acronym for more than you asked for. I think that would be really funny. Oh, that's a good call, Scott. I think it'll still render just fine. I'm responding to Scott talking about the fault will make invalid HTML. It'll be less accessible. Yeah, I will. Let me change that in a second. Good call, man. And then let's make this array really quick of awesome sauce, terrific JS, and foo bar baz. And that's our data. And since we have data, it should show the GitHub profile when it reloads. Yeah, there we go. So we know that our thing works. And in fact, let's quickly do this and just send an happy array, because that was our really only our only other conditional. And it should say no repos were found. So in fact, what we can do to make sure we have our what could we do? Here's what we can do. we will make this a div. Stay with me. And if we have length, we will do an ordered list, and we will give it a class name equal to GitHub repos list, and then we'll get really pedantic, as you should with BEM, but GitHub profile repos list item, and we'll make that a little better here in a second. Now, because we're inside of JSX again, I do believe we'll need to do this once more. Oh, I forgot to close it, so Prettier's not going to work. Thank you. I did forget it. And look at that. And then down here, let's make another div, class name equal GitHub profile repos empty. I suppose this, yeah, we'll just do empty. Yes, I could totally make the list into a component. You can make whatever you want into a component. But one of the things I like to help teach people is don't optimize prematurely. You could totally make a list component, and that might be really useful to you. It might not. It's really not that much markup to write. It's not. You're not making things too messy for you. You could totally make it with a pattern we'll learn eventually as a function as children pattern, where like we could make a list and then pass whatever component we want into it to be used as the list item. So there's a lot of options there. In fact, I mean, go ahead and explore, but don't optimize too early. It's not the end of the world for this. We're just making a very simple little component right now, and right now we don't have any other lists in our app, so I think this is good. So all right, we have our wrapping class. We have a list if it's there. We have our item, and this one if it's empty. And yeah, so I think that should be all the right. Oh, this did not update. That should be all the right markup. Yeah, this got moved over. It's not a part of the list anymore. It's in a div. So yeah, that's great. And then we can uncomment this out, and we'll see our list get made again. And there's our list. Sweet. All right, so now let's actually use the lifecycle methods to get data. So need to wet the throat, wet the whistle, you know. I'm going to say a quick cheers to all of you if you're at home having a relaxing evening, such as myself. Thank you for being here. Stay classy wherever you live. My wife went to college in San Diego, so, you know, occasionally in this house we get to drop that line. It's good stuff. We also really like to say milk was a bad choice. Which once you're over 30, frequently it is, unfortunately. All right, let's get rid of this. And we don't have any data, so let's go fetch our data. Cheers, Randwill. I hope that's a good pronunciation of you. All right. So, what I wanted to show you guys was a little website I came across maybe 3 months ago. It's called reactarmory.com/guides/lifecycle simulators. I'll try and remember to post this in the show notes on YouTube. I've been taking the videos, processing them down and uploading them to YouTube. And oh, I'm so sorry, everyone. But this is a really good website that has a visual description of the various lifecycle cycles that go on in a component. And we're going to focus on this one right now, component did mount. This one is probably the one that you will use the most often outside of render. At least I think so. In my experience, it's definitely the one I've used a lot. The other ones I've used a bit is the constructor, if you want to call that part of the lifecycle method. You need to set up stuff, but as I showed last week, we're using the Babel plugin for transforming class properties, and we probably won't need the constructor as often because we won't need to bind methods anymore, and we won't need to unless we need to set up state with props. If we need to do that, we'll have to use the constructor. But you'll use component did mount a lot. You will not use component will mount very often. We'll talk really briefly about why you won't do that so often. You can use it, but waiting for component did mount is generally a much safer and better idea. And then occasionally we might use should component update. This is a way to optimize a component. Components will change anytime props or state change, and if their parents change, they will also change. So sometimes we need to make optimizations by opting out of updating our component should we not need to. We won't cover that tonight, but we'll get into that at another time when we could talk about pure component and that kind of thing. I have used component will receive props quite a bit. This is like new props are coming in. It gets the next props as the argument to the method, and maybe we need to compare something about the next props and this props, and if something has changed, we need to update state. This is useful to us. So component did mount, component will receive props. You will often see me abbreviate these when I type to just CWRP or something like that. So not in the component itself. I mean, like if we're ever slacking or tweeting or that kind of thing, I will abbreviate these sometimes. But those two are the ones I use the most, and they're the ones you really need to know. One of the reasons you want to avoid component will mount, they have a really great quote right here, is here. The component will mount method can accomplish many of the same tasks as constructor and component did mount, and you can call set state inside it to change state, but it can cause side effects that you want to avoid. If you cause a change in props and component did mount, it is obvious that the component will need to re-render. So yeah, you'll render it, it's mounted, you might need to do some updates, and you're like, oh, something changed, I need to render again. That's fine. That's what React's designed to do. It's meant to render many times. It's totally okay. I mean, you should be trying to optimize for avoiding too many renders, but really, like for things like this, like we're going to go fetch some data, this is fine, right? So however, if you cause a change of props within component will mount, React's behavior is far from obvious. When a component's props change within component will mount, the following call to render will still use the old props. So you've made a trade-off here. Component did mount optimizes for getting the data in a good way, whereas component did mount optimizes for render. It renders the first time, does things, renders. Like it's optimized to render again, right? Component will mount is optimized to go fetch fast, like a little earlier, but you're gonna wait while that stuff happens to get a good render, or something might get bad with the props. So I generally tell people, and personally I avoid component will mount. It's not really one I need. If you're wondering where you can read about all these lifecycle methods, go ahead and check out the React docs, and it'll cover all the lifecycle methods. I actually think here, the component lifecycle, this one's great. Let's look at this real quick. So in mounting, you have these lifecycle hooks that fire. In updating, these lifecycle hooks will fire in this order. And unmounting, this will fire. And it talks about other APIs on a component. Go check it out, the component lifecycle, like in the docs. It'll be worth your time to understand it if you don't already. But let's use component did mount. Let's do something with it. All right. So I'm going to want to fetch some data here. In order to fetch some data, I'm going to bring in a library. I think I have Axios in this. You could just use fetch, but I do like Axios. I like it. I like its promise-based API. I do enjoy some of the niceties of it. Really use what's right for your project. But I enjoy it. I'm going to check my package.json to see that I have it. It looks like I don't. So let's add it. Axios. We'll just add it really fast. Take a sip of my beer. Oh, that's good. Oh man, I'm gonna have to start like having like a little fridge right here, so I can get a second beer as I keep going. You know, I don't want to stop. I wanna keep going and be active and I just don't want to quit interacting with y'all. I really enjoy it. I've really been enjoying every one of you hanging out and chatting with me. It's been a lot of fun. All right, we have Axios in our app now, and what we're gonna do is an Axios.get, and we're just gonna pass in this URL. And we'll just hard code it. And then this is a promise, so we will get a response back, and we'll want to get the response.data off of it. And we'll actually want to set state data equals response.data. Actually, we can do a little trick here. We can destructure our incoming response, and then we can just do this. Whoa, fancy, right? And then we can actually, I think, let's just do this for now. We'll see what happens. See if I got this right. So when the component mounts, it'll fetch some data from the API, and then we are going to pass that data into our set state call, which should update the state, which should fire render. We'll get the data, and it should show a GitHub profile. It should be a little broken because we don't have repos at the moment. So, as much as I wanted to do that, let's do this. I'm going to show you object using spread in an object. Okay, so we will spread out the data we just got. What this will do is take all the keys and spread it out, and then we'll also do repos as an empty array. I don't want to break our object at the moment, and we can make this a little more legible. So we'll do this. And this might make a little more sense by breaking it out on different lines. So we're going to set state with an object. We're going to set the key data, this key. We're going to take the data we've received and spread it out. Since we're not doing that trick anymore, I know I just went through the pain of doing it, but let's do this. And we'll just, so it's very obvious to people, we're going to spread out the response.data, and we're going to also add an empty array of repos at the moment onto that data. I'll fix this in a second. I just want to get make sure our response and like our Ajax call works. So let's refresh the page. Should show loading for a little bit. Oh, boom. Did you see that? I'm going to reload it again. I might even have to add like a little timeout in there. Oh, it's so fast. It's so fast. Let's do this. I want it to be a little slower. Just for the sake of demonstrating what's happening. You don't need to do this in your application, folks. I'm doing this for the sake of making sure we see that it did switch. We'll add a big 3-second delay in there. So this should show loading for 3 seconds and then fire. And then boom, we got our data. Actually, let's look at the network tab and just make sure that's happening. In fact, you see it right there. We're going to refresh the page again. We see our loading. It's going to fire here. Boom. And we get our response. And yeah. So let's remove that set timeout now that you see that's happening. But that's a great pattern to use in React, right? Like if we don't have something, we want to show one thing. And once we get our data, we get that asynchronous return, we'll show something else. And this makes for a really great user experience, right? Like no one wants to sit around and have an app that's not usable. Like we don't want to wait for everything to come down the pipe and be waiting a few seconds, especially if we're on a bad connection. We can actually build out all the rest of our app, like the header, the footer, all these things. And now we have a method and a strategy using lifecycle hooks to really componentize our data fetching all over our app. Like maybe you have a UI that's getting some items from a store and getting a cart and getting this and that, and now you can have all these little places loading so that like the user knows something's happening, and you can actually like optimize for that data fetching. So let's get rid of that set timeout. That was just a demonstration. I hope no one takes that and actually puts that in their app. That would be funny though. I mean, I suppose you could improve perception sometimes by slowing things down, as weird as that sounds, but it does happen. So we're gonna just making sure I deleted it correctly. I did. Okay, let's get some real repos. Why don't we chain we know we're getting the repos URL in our response. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something that's maybe not, I don't know. There's probably a better way to do this. I'm just going to do what's in my head on the fly. So what I want to return is, I'm going to want to return the response. You know, will this code get put on your GitHub as a start, finished, or different branches with the progress? Yeah, Bob. Yes, I will definitely. What I'll do is probably tomorrow or Thursday. I will go through and like make this again, and I'll write comments in the code and add it to the repo. The repo we're working from is Kyle Shevlin, React 101. So you'll be able to go check it out. And what I've been trying to do is make each commit the next lesson. We'll see if that pattern can keep going. Okay, so we've got a response coming in. I need to not only pass that response around, but I also want to go I want to get the repo's URL from it and do something with it. So let's take this chance right now. This dot set state. We're gonna set data to response data. Okay, we'll do that, but we'll return the response dot repos. We know it's called repos URL. We're going to return it to the next then. We'll just call it URL. And in here, we're going to fire another call to Axios. Like I said, there's probably a better way to do this. But in here, we're going to return that. And I could just return it and do another then. Or I could just call... let's make sure we use our function signatures so we don't actually end up with any weird... if you remember last week, we talked about you can use a function signature or an object signature and set state, and using the function signature puts them in a queue and fires them in the correct order. So there's no accidental chance of overwriting anything. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fetch for our second URL. we're going to get the response, and we're going to set it to repos in our state. So this dot set state. I don't need the previous state. That's why I'm not passing any arguments to this one. And what we'll do is we'll actually, we'll spread out, actually we do need the previous state in this one. So we'll spread out the prev state in data. I think that'll work. Prev state.data, and then repos should be the response.data this time. I know that's a bit confusing. If I had a little more time and I wasn't live coding and making this up as I go, maybe I could come up with a slightly less nested way of handling this, especially if I could get, but we're kind of treating this as the idea is like, we got one response, we need to act on some of the data in there, right? So we got the response data repos URL, we passed this in fact, let's be explicit repos URL. We're going to get it, and then with that response, we're going to call this.setState again, using the previous state. Let me get, let me just save, see if, yeah, there we go. Okay. So with the previous state, we're going to spread out that data as data, and then we're going to add repos in it. And I think this will end up with, hopefully it'll end up with a state that we're kind of expecting. Okay, we definitely broke something. So let's just work our way through. Cannot read property length of undefined. Okay. So the reason that is we do need a default yes, okay. So we'll spread out the data. We need a default array that's empty on the first pass. Okay. So the reason that broke is that we need a default, like there was no repos key and it didn't know how to handle it. I think, Jason, if you look in the docs, it even calls it prev state. Just I'm just saying, because you're returning the next state. So yes, you're right. It is the current state. I'm just using the docs word. Sorry. I shouldn't be so pedantic. I will work on that. I'm sorry. Regardless, sorry to get off track. What we're going to do is we're going to give it an empty repo so that we don't get the error of an undefined, because we are checking for length and not just that repos exist. And then in the second call, we'll update that repos with the response data to the repos URL. I think that should fix this. If it broke, we'll just keep working. Oh, I must have had a syntax error here. Line 19. Okay. Do I have one too many of these? Oh, I have too few of those. Okay. Is that it? That's it. That should do it. And something broke. A cross origin error was thrown. That's not great. An error occurred in the LI component. Objects are not valid as React child. I think it's just this response is different than I wanted. Yeah. It's big time different. So what we can do is we can map that response that we got. Map. This is a repo, and we want to return the repo full name. So that should give us a string, not an object. And I think, boom. Yes, we got it working. All right. So, are you guys following me and gals following me? Like, are you friends following me? There's the inclusive word, right? All right. So we've made our container component. Components are designed only to care about fetching data and passing that data along. In this case, we're using component did mount. We're hitting the GitHub API, getting my data. With that response, we're gonna set state the first time really quick with all the rest of the response, and then we need to return the repo's URL from our data to the next chain. This is how you can use promises. You'll always get return a promise from a then, right? And that's what allows you to keep chaining. But whatever value you return is passed to the success callback. Excuse me. So our repo's URL is passed in. We make a second fetch for it, and this time we just keep the data that we had. This is kind of an immutable way of doing this. We're making a new object with the same data, but we're adding, we're now merging in a new repo's value. And what we're doing is we're taking the data from this response, and they're big objects. We don't need the whole object. We just want the full name at the moment. And we're just mapping over them, so we end up with an array of just strings. And then here, once we get all through that, component did mount, our set states are called. Those get batched into a queue and fired. And what we end up doing is like, okay, they up the state updated, so our render function gets fired, our render method, I mean, and we take the data off the state. We have data, and we're going to display this GitHub profile with this data. Otherwise, show the loading spinner. So that's what we've built today, right? Like, and what you could see is it looks like it only returns a list of 30. I have more than that. I wonder, maybe we can look at the API, and maybe there's a query param of a repos API. Maybe there's a query param we can do to get more of the repos real quick. I don't know that it's really necessary. I just kind of want to check real quickly. Affiliation type, sort, direction, list public repos. Maybe that's all my public repos. I definitely have a lot more repos than that. I have 107, but maybe I only have 30 public ones. I don't know. I don't think so. But anyways, this is kind of how we work with React, right? Like, this is how we can use the lifecycle methods. And it's also a great pattern to learn of separating concerns between components. Like, one thing that's a bit challenging, I think, I'm gonna take a small second to kind of stop coding for a second, just kind of talk to y'all. One thing that I think some people really struggle with when they come to React, maybe they've come from a different system. Like, I came from mostly like Ruby on Rails, and then a little bit of Ember. But I think what happens is people who are coming to a truly componentized system get a little confused as to what components are. I think the immediate thought to have, like the initial instinct, is to think components are just reusable bits of UI, right? Earlier today in the chat, someone was talking about, can I make a list component, right? It looks like Napcats was talking about that. And that is a great use case, right? Like, we have a bit of UI that we can pass some data to and reuse it again and again. But the association people make is that it's only like UI, right? A component needs to map to something I see on the screen in the browser. And really, that's not the only thing a component is. A component is an isolated and encapsulated bit of logic, right? Like, if you've worked on other frameworks in the past, you've heard of like model view controller. probably, and you worked really hard on separating those concerns. You worked really hard on organizing like your data, your objects, and like their relationships, and then you organized your templates to they were going to eventually get data, and then you have controllers that were like where you would massage and get where you would get data from your models, right? Or you retrieve the right models and stuff, right? Now in React, essentially you can replace the V and the C with just components, right? But our components can handle both those tasks. What all it is just writing the JavaScript to do so. People talk about React as a view layer. It's certainly a view layer, but it's definitely a controller layer too, in my mind. Because in this case, we're not actually really presenting anything so much as we're controlling what components we want to display. Essentially, a container is basically like a mini router. No URL is part of this router, right? But we have some state, whether it's props coming in or state that we're managing inside the component, and we're saying based on this, massage this data, pass this data on. In fact, I've written components that you return null. They're just handling data. Maybe something came in or an action was happening, and I don't need the UI to update, but I need the state to update. And I've definitely written container components that kind of do that. Or I call them renderless components, right? Trying to think of a good example. So in an app I'm building right now for fun, I have an auth container, and all it's doing is I've isolated Firebase's on auth state changed into a component that I don't need to render anything, but I want it to update my Redux state to tell me, hey, there's a current user available or not. This way it's in one centralized place and updates my my global state everywhere, but I don't need to show anything in the UI. So that's a good example of making a component act as a controller. Whereas we've done it twice tonight, though. We have great examples of making a component act as a view, as presentational components. I see that Napcats he's alluded to calling them a dummy component, or container components are sometimes called smart components. But I try and avoid those terms. I really prefer the container and presentational. And I think once you learn the flexibility of components, that they really are an encapsulation of logic, not an encapsulation of UI, like I think that opens up some doors for how you can use React to accomplish things. A really interesting talk given at React Rally by Devin Lindsay was about using React to change the RFID in her hand to unlock her door. Her and her husband got like these things embedded in their hand, right? And they can use it to operate things around their house. And she uses React to actually build some of these programs that are running on like Arduino and stuff. So when you realize a component is just isolated logic, like I think that'll open up your brain to new possibilities. K-Rocket. You're right, I could use promise.all, but the reason I did it that way is I didn't have the repo's URL yet. So I needed to make one fetch to return the repo's URL. What I could eventually do is once I know the endpoint, you're totally right that I could maybe just have an endpoint, maybe a function that's awaiting the login or the username, and then do it that way. But just for now, because I needed to get the first fetch to even get the repo's URL and the data response, that's why I went that way. That's just what I was thinking. I would love it once I post things that you guys can make PRs, or you can even make PRs for the things I'm making, or cool ideas you want. I would totally review them and see if we can't get them in. I all this is to help you and to help others and just to have some fun. I love coding in my free time, but it can get boring and a little lonely, and doing this with y'all, it's really awesome. It really makes me happy. So I hope it makes you happy too. But yeah, Components are super flexible. I really encourage you to learn how to like manipulate that flexibility in cool ways. I don't know. That's what I love about React. It's just how flexible and free everything is, and you just start to realize you look at everything like that's a component, that's a component, and it's just cool. I love it a whole lot. So, all right, we have crushed it, I think, with building some asynchronous container and presentational components and using some lifecycle methods. If we wanted to use another lifecycle method here, there's really not another one to use in this component, unfortunately. Like I think it's just really it's about as simple as it needs to be. We're doing our fetch here, and we're just handling a state. I guess what we could do is we could do something like this. Well, hello, Tolly. My cat has decided to join me. And is rubbing up against my leg. She knows it's almost dinner time. We could improve this component by adding some error state to it, and essentially like catching who and error. I'll need to add this to state 2 is like the error message. Like you could do this, right? This would be a way to improve the component. So we catch any error that happens, and then what we can do here is we could also, instead of having this ternary, we can add a third thing. We could we can do has error return. We can return something. I don't have it yet, but I could have like a display error component, and we'll pass in message equals error message. Like we could do this. Like we could just do a div, and right now we could do that, right? Like, and this would be a way to make our component slightly more robust. And what you could really do, and I'll get into some point, we don't have time to cover it tonight, but you could handle these with things like higher order components too, where like this loading state is available as a way you can pass it around your whole app, and you can enhance components that way. I'd love to get into that pattern sometime soon. I just want to make sure that we've really walked through as many basics as we can to really get to know the basics of React and be able to do stuff. So given that I've done container and presentational components this week, I think it might be good to introduce Redux next week. And so I think that's what I will try and plan on doing. In fact, it would be kind of overkill to do that with Redux, but I think that's what we'll do. We'll take this example here and we'll just Reduxify it. Yeah, I think that'll be a great game plan for next week. So we've got about 10 minutes left on the stream, and as I like to do in the last 10 minutes is I like to answer questions if y'all have any. I really want to start taking some ideas so that as this series grows, that like if you have specific things you want to focus on or you want to learn, I would really love to have that kind of information and be able to try and help y'all with it. And we don't have to do just React. Eventually, at some point, I'm happy to do some other JavaScript stuff. I'll probably avoid other frameworks per se. I'm not really all that interested in other frameworks, but that doesn't mean we can't like learn some the important like JavaScript fundamentals that are used in most of them. So yeah, I'm going to answer a couple questions here. I see Ahi777 asks about async await. Async await is totally another way you could do this if that's what you like to do. If you don't like promises and thens, you could do async call to Axios and and other things, and we could, instead of thens, we could just await, do this, await, do that, await, do that. So in a future date, let's definitely handle async await. I think that would be something worth doing. All right, what do you think about the difference between Redux and Mob X? So I'm going to be perfectly honest, and I'll always try to be. I have not used Mob X in any application yet. Redux was the first one I learned, and so far I've never run into something where it doesn't really handle my use case. So I haven't spent a ton of time with MobX. I think people are interested in it, from what I understand, because it uses, I think, observer patterns, and it's a little less boilerplate. So I can definitely maybe put together something and try and learn a little bit about it one of these weeks. I think it might take me a few weeks to really get up to speed, though, to be able to do a 2-hour stream on it. Just thought I'd tell you that. As far as it matters, though, like don't use either too soon. Make sure your app needs it, and then from there, like, to some degree, it's a little bit of bike shedding. But on other hands, I think they have trade-offs. I think Preeti Casaretti has a really great talk about the differences between MobX and Redux from React.Conf this year. So please go check that out. Napcats talks about the GitHub having a GraphQL API. They certainly do. So yeah, let's do that sometime. Let's maybe next week. Let's do it in 2 weeks, if I remember it. In 2 weeks, let's change this component to use GraphQL a little bit. I have not used GraphQL extensively yet. It was just coming out when I was at my last job. To be perfectly frank, I haven't had a server yet at work to use it. And I haven't had a need for it yet in my personal projects, because most of the APIs I'm still using are REST. But you're totally right. I do think it's the way of the future. There's a great fun function video on it if you want to do some basics, if you haven't seen it before. I think it's really awesome. And in fact, I think it kind of kills the model. Like you just don't need to deal with models the same way you used to. You could. I think it's great. I can't wait to do it. Goal, just wanted to say thanks for streaming. This kind of content would have been great when I was learning programming a long time ago, so it's good to see people make this. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm really enjoying streaming a lot. I'm loving getting to interact with you people. I really hope you guys take the time. I really hope you guys and gals, I'm so bad at this. I'm trying really hard. I really hope you all take the time to interact with me on Twitter. I really love it when you do. And you can send me tweets and DMs and all that stuff. So that's great. Bob Danube. Your color, unfortunately, is like a dark blue on a black background, and I could barely read it in my screen. So people that aren't familiar with React as you are, where should we start to get to that next level? I've read through the React docs, but where do I go from there? Okay. I said this a little earlier, and I did mean it. It's a great resource. Please go check out Brian Holt's Complete Intro to React. I really do think this is great. If you can get access to front-end masters, you can watch it, and it's really helpful. I know Kent C. Dodds has some good courses on Egghead.io, if you can get access to that too. There's lots of videos out there. I think the key is just start building stuff. Like build things that other people have built, and then look at what they've done. Build something simple. Build a little GitHub UI. Build this and build that. And the more you build, the better you'll be. It's really that simple. There's not that many React patterns, and that's the key. You just learn patterns. let me point to a very helpful website, reactpatterns.com. My buddy Michael Chan built this, and this walks you through all the patterns that we're eventually going to all get to build your React apps with. And when you get really good at these patterns, you'll notice just how much faster and how improved your UIs will be. Royal.js, I'd be interested in how you would determine where to use Redux versus component state. This is actually pretty simple to me. So Redux is all about things that need to be known throughout your app at like a more global level, or at least a higher level. You might have a number of components that need to care about a certain thing. State within a component is great for things that are isolated to just that one. For example, a great set state example is like an accordion, right? Like there is no reason to keep in state in your whole app in Redux in your global state, which panel is open or closed, right? That's a waste of resources and would be a lot of code to just tell your whole state about that, and no one else is listening to it. Whereas you could set that state in the component itself, and that's really the only thing that needs to access it. I think doing things like that, or like visibility ones, like when you need to hide or show something, like a nav toggle or something like that, like those are perfect for state. And I think that's really where having both shines. Like when you start using a state management library like Redux or Mob X, like there's nothing you don't need to go a whole hog on it. You don't need to put everything in it, and that's overkill. That's often worse. It degrades performance. Recognize those moments where doing one or the other or both makes sense. So there's definitely still plenty of times that state is the better way to handle it. So I'm so sorry everybody about this this cold that's getting away. Today was really the first day I felt really good. I'm feeling like 95%. I just have some lingering stuff going on, but it looks like I'm about out of time. I've got about one more minute, so I'm just going to take this minute to say I want to thank you all again. I really appreciate you sticking with me. You're on your phone watching. Yeah, okay, let me get that right here. You got that, Bob Danube? BT Holt, complete intro to React. I'll tweet about it right after this stream. I'll give Brian a shout out and I'll let y'all know. You could follow me on. Sorry, I was trying to read something real quick. The tab that says Component Lifecycle. Yeah, this one is reactarmory.com guides/lifecycle simulators. Let me here. I will put that. Let me bump that up. Is that big enough for you? I hope that's big enough for you. Once again, I want to thank y'all so much. I think next week, let me look at the calendar really quick. I don't even know what next week looks like. I'm so bad with, oh, come on. You can just pull up my Google Calendar. I don't care. I don't know why it's not coming. Oh, there it is. How did it get to be the second one? That's crazy. So next week, looks like I have Halloween is Tuesday. So let's try and stream on Wednesday, folks. We'll do that. I'll let y'all. Some of you might have kids or something, and you'll be busy that night. So we'll try and do it Wednesday next week. Stay tuned on Twitter. I'll let y'all know. Once again, thank you so much. Please tweet me any questions you have, and I'm really excited to keep going on this React journey with y'all. So once again, thank you, and have a good night.